Joining me today is Joe Pardo, also known as Super Joe Pardo. He's a New Jersey-based business coach. Joe focuses on designing individual solutions to accelerate growth with each of his clients. He says it's a team effort and not a templated approach that has allowed his journey to help a wide range of businesses at all levels. In 2014, Joe decided to leave his family's $100 million business and pursue his dream of owning his own business by helping others pursue their dreams. And by 2018, Joe was an award-winning podcaster and host of the Super Joe Pardo Show, along with being a business owner and a best-selling author. He began speaking all over the country to business owners and even at the United Nations in 2016. Calling himself a business optimization strategist. What a word. Super Joe brings a series of strategy, application, and execution planning to every entrepreneur team and business that he works with. And he's also founder of the Independent Podcast Conference. Joe focuses on putting the right methods into the right practices in order to bring personalized solutions for every one of his clients. Super Joe, welcome to the Go for Launch podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Super Brandon. How are you feeling today?
I'm great, man. Hey, listen,
I'm glad to hear that.
Appreciate
awesome.
it. So we're kind of on the East Coast, but tell everybody where you are today as we're recording on September 29th, 2020.
I am in South Jersey. I'm right outside of Philadelphia. You can actually see the skyline. Like if you go down about a mile from my house, 2 miles from my house, you can see the skyline of Philly.
Oh, outstanding.
Which is pretty cool.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I love the area up there. We got some friends that live in Madison, and it's a great place. So I am in Charlotte, North Carolina, also known as Huntersville, a little bit north of Charlotte. But so again, we're same time zone, a little bit further apart. But I'm so happy that you're taking the time to chat with us today. Well, I want to start with finding out, where did you get the nickname Super Joe? And do you have like a big S on your chest? Or
I do not have a big S on my chest. It was given to me by my dear friend, brother Matt, and he knew I was going through a tough time in my life. And he and I were working together at that point. Like he was working at the shop, and we were office mates. So I got to spend like every day with my best friend for a couple, like 2 years he worked with us. And so it was, which was pretty cool. Anyway, he drew this picture, and you can see it on my website if you go to the About page, where it says Super, it's Super Joe, and it's like a stick figure. But I asked him to explain like why, and he's like, because I'm always trying to raise other people up and make sure that their feeling is great as I try to feel every single day. I don't always get to accomplish it, but I try every single day to feel great and raise up the people around me up on their journey. So that's where the name came from. So I happened to find that piece of paper in my desk after I left the company like a year afterwards, and I was like, I wonder if there's like superjoepardo.com, and I registered it, and then about a year or so later ago I adopted the name and brought it on because as more and more people were calling me it anyway. So it's greatly appreciated.
I love it because you're the only Super Joe Pardo, right? There could be a couple other Joe Pardos out there.
Super G.I. Joe. In fact, I was just having a conversation about this literally right before I came on here about that. And yeah, there's not too many. I think there's like a Twitch channel that I saw a while ago that was like, Super Joe, Super G.I. Joe, or G.I. Joe Super Joe or something like that. But other than that's apparently it.
I love it.
Me and G.I. Joe.
I love it. You got one of those names where it's like the game show. Tell them what they want, Joe Pardo.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, right. Well, they've won a fabulous prize. It's a trip to Disney World for 4. It's going to be awesome. You're going to have a great time. Don't worry about
I love it. You got the little bell going, so we can use that later as well. So feel free. But listen, I mentioned in the introduction that you left your family's $100 million business. And it sounds like at some point, even your brother, you guys were working together. What was making $100 million? What were you guys doing as a family?
so we were in the trucking industry. My family's grew up in in the trucking industry from like the 60s on, and my grandfather left his the family business at the time was repair to those trucks. He left that company, started up a parts company, and that blew up really big. We were the largest independently owned truck parts company on the East Coast, and we also eventually diversified into trucking itself, additional truck repair shops, as well as a brokerage firm as well, and a properties company for all the commercial and residential properties. So it was a total of 5 companies that made up this giant enterprise company that I ultimately decided to leave back in 2014.
So let me ask you about that. Can you talk about why you left?
Yeah.
Because that's a hell of a thing for a lot of people, especially when you're in part of a family business. I assume you've been around it a long time. Like you said, your grandfather started it off.
6 years old.
Yeah. And so, there's a lot of comfort in that. And your other family members are probably thinking Joe's going to be in the business for a long time, maybe even take over. And you decide to leave. Tell us about that story and what made you want to venture out on your own.
Yeah, so I've always had a passion for helping people. As a 6-year-old, I cried on my grandparents' floor as like, hey, I'm the only boy in the family. I don't want to take over the family business. And as 6-year-old Joe logic, thinking because I have a sister, I don't have any other brothers, no other cousins or anything like that would have be able to even step in like that. And, I was like, I wanted to be a child psychologist to help other kids going through divorce like I was dealing with at the age of 6. And, I'm sitting there crying. So I'm like, I don't want to do this and all that. And my grandfather and my grandmother were like, oh, well, you can do whatever you want, Joe. Just, do it to the best of your ability. And like, it kind of like resonated with me. Now, eventually I found out that you'd have to go to school for 10 years. And I'm like, oh, hold on, let's pump the brakes on that. Cause I'm not the big kind of school kind of guy, kid at the time. So I was like, all right, I'm not doing that. So when you fast forward, years and as time went on, like I ended up sticking around in the company. From 6 years old, was like sweeping floors and checking inventory and putting stock away and stuff like that during the summers. And fast forward into 16, 17, 18 years old, I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but it really didn't. And I was like, all right, I'm, like you said, the comfort thing. I stuck around. I went to college for 1.5 semesters, didn't end up sticking it out. It was supposed to be for business administration. And so I have always pretty much, like, my family grew up under trucks. I grew up in front of computers. So for me, I understood tech really well and like how computers think and all that. And so I was like, oh, well, I could do something in that field. But ultimately I ended up taking over the IT operations of the company, from the servers to the desktops to the phones to the fax machines to like everything. Like, basically, if it plugged into a wall, I was pretty much
you were the guy.
Yeah. And ironically enough, I was called the director of communications at the time. I wasn't even officially the IT director. There was nobody else. Like, there was nobody else anybody was calling for any of these things, like VPN help or any of that stuff. So and eventually that kind of transitioned into getting my fingers in pretty much everywhere in the business, and ultimately becoming the director of operations, and working on like complex algorithms in our computer system to like manage our inventory better. And we were kind of running into a bit of a problem. Like, after the 2008 bubble, things were kind of hairy, and then we went into 2012, and of course, Sandy happened in 2012. We lost a tremendous amount of inventory up in our North Jersey, which was under like 5-6 feet of water. That took 2 weeks of going back and forth every day to like clean and get it back up and running and build, countertops again and all that stuff. So it was a really messy time. And at that time in 2012, I was implementing these, the inventory changes, and we had a hub and spoke kind of system. So the idea was, we had the main central warehouse, and we'd ship out from the central warehouse. So most things came into there. And the idea was like, okay, well, if we utilize this computer system that we already have, and we basically they had a very mostly broken algorithm at the time, that nobody really used. And I like went to the owner of the company and was like, hey, look, this is what we need, and here's how we can do it, and then started to make adjustments and things and build on top of that algorithm that was pretty much useless. And even my grandfather at the time was like, oh, you can't have the computer do any of this stuff. We had to do it by hand. I'm like, no. Like, there's a way to do, like, if Walmart can figure this out, like I'm sure we can figure it out. And we already had like a base to work with. So I built on top of that, and got it to a point where we were able to basically suck in the inventory that was just sitting on shelves. Because inventory, as you mentioned, the word comfort, people feel comfortable when there's lots of things surrounding them, and they're like, oh, Jimmy's going to come in and buy that thing tomorrow. Like, he was here just yesterday. It's like, you look at the computer, don't lie, right? The computer knows that it's been 24 months. Jimmy hasn't come back for that part. So, maybe you don't need 10 of them on the shelf. Let's keep 2. You want to keep 2, fine, but send me the other 8, right? And we, I worked really hard with our managers and remember, I'm 24, 25, 26, so most of the people I'm working with have been in the companies as long as I had been alive.
Wow.
Yeah. So our retention of key personnel was high. And it's also a small industry, truck parts, right? So there isn't like there's not a ton of players out there for you to like go and move around to. So I was like, I learned a lot about compromise and all these things. I wrote a lot about it in my last book that I wrote back in 2018, all about how sales won't save your business and how processes and systems are, really key, because like you'll lose your pants basically if you're selling this and you think it's like worth this and it's really not by the time you add in all the other costs that you're not adding in or looking the other way on and things of that nature. Like it gets out of control fast. So we did all this, and what I found was I got really burnt out, because like my days were like, I'd be at the shop by 8:00 in the morning. I'd go into the warehouse because we had tremendous amounts of pallets and crates of stuff coming in from these stores, getting dropped off in the morning, or were dropped off. They were getting dropped off in the morning because the truck ran at night. So the truck was there. We unload it and start checking stuff in, getting it up on the shelves, and then pulling that stuff off the shelves to send new stuff to those locations. So it's just I was there at 4:00. I'd go into my office. I'd start doing all the paperwork, try to get it done by 5:30, 6:00 if I can get everything updated and moved around. And then I come home, I'd eat dinner, I go for a run, and then I'd be at my computer till about 2 a.m. So by 9 o'clock to 10 to 2 a.m., I'm back in my computer because I'm running these algorithms over and over and over again to like see if I can get the dial it in just right, so I can get the perfect set of parameters to put into it for each of those lines. But they take forever to run because like the systems we were running was like a Pentium 2 server from 1998 or whenever Pentium 2s were a thing. So it was this old thing. And trying to do that and then wake back up, be at the shop at 8:00, start all over. So about a year and a half of doing that, we were able to reduce our inventory level from like $6 million down to about $2.5 million in about a year. And it would fluctuate. In the beginning of the month, we pour more in. It would go up from like 2.5 to like 3, and then come back down to like 2.75. And it's always fluctuating. But that was the goal, was like increase the ROI, liquidate this old stuff without having to like sell it for pennies on a dollar, that kind of thing. So we did some returns. My grandfather didn't believe in returns. His whole thing was like, if I bought it for $2 and I put it on my shelf and it takes 2 years to buy it, or for somebody to come in and buy it, the blue sheet price on it is going to go up, and I'll be able to sell it for, the cost will have gone up to like $2.75 or something like that. So it's like, but I bought it at $2, so I'm inherently making more money. It's like, yeah, but everything pays rent. So you're literally taking up space for stuff that's not paying the rent. It's not paying its rent for the space it's taking up. So like, let's have less of that stuff and more of the stuff, like more space for the stuff that we can move more of and have the cash, available to purchase those things and have more space for it. So, that's that's one of the things from my first book is like, everything pays rent in necessity or in pleasure, right? So it's gotta pay rent somehow.
Right.
The more space it takes up, the more it's got to pay in one of those two departments.
Now, is this
So
the
yeah.
type? Is that the type of advice you give people now? Do you work with other distributors and businesses of that nature that are carrying inventory?
So that's some of them. I mean, I work with a lot. I've worked with service-based companies, brick and mortar, businesses. Like I work with a lot of different businesses because the three areas I focus on: team, offer, process. So for me, like it doesn't matter. Like inventory isn't the only thing, but that was like to that point was like the crowning achievement of the things that I had accomplished, right? Reduce inventory a ridiculous amount in a very short period of time, work with a very small team of people, most of which were not even on the, they didn't have enough pay grade to even understand what was going on, but understood it better than the people that were like, no, I want my inventory. I got to hold on to this, thing. And the ironic part, Brandon, is at the end of the day, a year after I left, the company was that specific company was sold. The parts company was sold to a giant conglomerate roll-up company, right? So a lot of the people that stayed on board learned the hard way that the things that I was trying to implement and like ultimately give them the rope to hang themselves with, as far as like, hey, look, it's calling for you to send all 10 back. Send me 8 of them, keep 2 of them on the shelf. That's fine. We'll move the other 8 into another store that is actively selling that part. They learn the hard way that like, they don't play by those rules. Like they dictate what you're going to get. And you have a very, very small margin of like things you can just hang on to for just in case reasons. So, ultimately it's like, it was validation, but like, it's like they, the same things that drove me crazy and drove me to the end of my rope with wanting to invest my time there, is ultimately the things that they got ended up with, in a way, less humanizing way.
Sure.
Yeah. So I mean, it is what it is, right? But I was trying to do everything I could in a way that didn't take forever, because we were like kind of in trouble back then between Sandy and the changes in the trucking industry, with the whole DPF filter thing coming on board in the couple of years there. So it was a tricky time.
Sure. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't know when they hear, oh, you were part of a family business, like, you were born into it. It's multi-million dollars. They don't know how much,
in
right?
1980, right?
Yeah,
it started
80.
in 81. Wow. I was born in 86. So like, it was still like through most of my childhood, it was still like a growing, budding thing that wasn't like, money. Everybody got money, it wasn't like that for most
but
of my
whether
childhood.
it's a family restaurant or whatever, even though it's been around for a while and people think, oh, super successful, et cetera. Like you said, times change, events happen, and that business that was once great for the family or whatever is now hitting some rocky patches, right? So
I mean, we lost like $700,000 just in that inventory, like between inventory and damages from Sandy in that one store. That was one of our biggest stores. But prior, like the store at our main location was the biggest store until we took over. It was called Goldie's Truck Parts, up in Kearney, New Jersey. Like literally, you could walk out like I always said, I could see the Philadelphia skyline, like the New York skyline was like right at the end of the driveway. It was in the armpit in New York. So, basically. So yeah, it's things do change, and they change fast, and it's hard when you have people that have been around for so long, and you're trying to like implement huge amounts of change in a short period of time. It's not always going to give you the desired result that you're looking for, as far as people being happy, but being able to get people on board. I mean, I learned so much over that year and a half. Like I could have left, like the decision for me to leave was something that started about 3, 4, even 5 years earlier than that. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was going through a bunch of changes, in life, because I was living life too at the same time, like trying to figure out like, what did I want to, want out of life, and where I wanted to be and all that. I mean, got married in 2012. I bought this house from my dad. This is the house I grew up in, actually. I bought this house from my dad in 2009. So, it's like all these things happened. And as they were happening, like in the back of my mind, I'm like, maybe I should go back to school. I have a bunch of other passions and things like that. So I like to say I marinate on things, because it's not that I'm trying to like be super slow about the decision making and not be decisive. It's just some decisions are bigger than others, right? Like, between me and my dad, like things are better, but not great. Like they're okay. Like they're in a better place than they were. When it was really toxic, like on the last day when we ended up in a fist fight and I had to go take a test at school after that.
Oh,
like,
wow.
The teacher didn't show up. Like, ding, ding. Thank you, professor, for not showing up. But, because it was so toxic. It got to the point where like we couldn't even have conversations at all, because it just turned into arguments, And I tell people this, not because it's just part of the story, but also because like it's a warning, right? This is a very much of a warning of, figuring out like what that you want, and then try to maybe figure it out a little bit, like how to do it a little bit faster, or take your time a little bit more, take a step back. Don't let things get to that point where it's terrible for everybody involved. And it's a shame. Like it shouldn't have been there. Now, I'll tell you, having our first kid in 2016 helped, speed up the process, because like we really didn't talk much at the time. But having a kid, like, he started to come around and see Ava and all that, and then more so 2 years later when we had our second kid, named after him. So, because we go every other generation with the names, Joe and then Dom and then Joe and then Dom. So this is like a 7-generation thing that I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be the one that screws
that. You can't break a streak.
I'll let Dom figure that out. Let him have that problem. I'm not going to be the one that stops that from happening. I mean, Ava would have been named Dom if she was a boy, but it just, things happened. So things have gotten better, but it's really, it's about, you and taking precautionary steps to not let this happen to you. Cause it wasn't pretty. And like I said, it's still a lot of things, like to this day, that just ain't, they're not perfect.
Yeah.
But they're better.
It's so interesting, Joe, because I didn't know where this conversation was going to go. Like so many interviews I do on this podcast, we say we're going to just talk about where you came from, right? And this whole issue of surviving a business, especially a family business, you're bringing up some very raw and painful subjects, right? People don't think about the fact that they are in partnership with their family members, right? In a family business. And, I've never been in a family business, but I've had partners. And those people become almost like family. And when you have rifts, it's extremely painful. It's like you're getting divorced. And people have to think, like you said, take the time, get some counseling, work with a business coach, talk to other people that have done it to make sure that they're not just blindly rushing in going, hey, because in the beginning stages, just like with a family, there's a honeymoon phase. And everybody loves it. Everybody's working together. And then the rocky parts start to come in and people start to fight, and money's an issue and lack of money is an issue. And all these other things are friction. And so, I'm glad that you're bringing all this up, not to say that we wanted this to be a painful episode, because we want to talk about the good stuff about your business, but thank you for sharing.
Of course. I have no problem. Like I said, this is a cautionary tale for people. This is how other people can learn and learn from my mistakes and trials and tribulations. With that said, so in 2018, after we had our second child, my wife had to leave her job as a teacher because we weren't going to pay for childcare because it's insane.
Yeah, stupid expensive in Jersey, probably, right? Yeah.
It is. I mean, to have 2 kids in there would have been like $2,400 a month, and it's like,
ouch.
Well, that's more than our mortgage. So I don't think that's gonna happen. That's not gonna happen. Working for benefits is not, as a teacher that works, not around the clock, but almost around the clock.
Yeah.
No, that ain't gonna happen. So, So she left, and like, so I had, my business, but my business wasn't pulling enough money at the time to be able to warrant it. So I ended up going back to work with my dad. He had, like I say, he had sold the parts company. He had shuttered the trucking company because logistics really weren't his thing. And he shuttered the brokerage company as well. So all he had was one repair shop that my great uncle and my great grandfather founded with my grandfather, right? And the one that my grandfather left and went started the parts company. So I came back in 2018 because like I needed more stable income, right? Mm-hmm. Like I needed more regular income. Insurance was a big thing. And
so you say, Dad, I just named a kid after you. You got to let me back in.
Well, so the way so the way my version of the story is, and obviously this is all my version of the story, but like, this is really like my version of the story. Once we had Dom, he started coming around like a lot, all of us, like every Friday he was coming by and he's like talking about what he had going on at the company. And he had gone through really tough times with the trucking company. Like, it was not like, you want to talk about, more money, more problems. Like, that was a big problem for him. He's still working through that to this day, like getting out of the trouble that he had with that. So, he's almost there. Like, he's, super survivor, by any stretch, really. And so he started coming by and like, talking about the company and like what's, building up the repair shop and how it was like his only thing. And, so he only had to focus on one thing, which is really a really important thing, I think, for him to be able to focus on one operation at a time. And I was just like, well, I'm not really interested in going back. Like, I'm trying to like drum up more business and do all these things, like, but it wasn't going fast enough, right? Like, because like my wife was leaving her job, summer's coming up, like, okay, I got to make a decision here. And so I sat down, like, all right, I was like, let's talk about what this looks like. Cause I'm not crazy about it, but let's just see where it goes. And it took weeks of negotiating back and forth about, pay and like responsibilities and like all that stuff, title, and future. Like, to me, like the way I saw it, cause he's, his whole thing was like, well, I'm going to buy more shops up and we're going to get bigger. And, I can't, I'm, 50 plus years old. I'm not going to run around all these shops, like all over creation. And I need somebody to help me do that. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. I'm not really that interested in that, though. I was like, I'm interested in building a franchise. Like, we'll build the system, we'll build the systems, we'll solve, the processes, get it really polished and worked out. I was like, you're the super sales guy. Like, you go and you sell it. I'll support you on it. We have the management in place already with our manager Bill. We have a marketing director still from the old days of Pardo Truck Parts, still working in the company. So we have the market, like, we have all these pillars set up, like, to do this. Like, we can set the process up, we can set the individual locations up with Bill, we can set up the sales up with you, we can set up the training with one of our senior techs, Walt, who's been there forever now at this point. And we have the marketing end. Like, we have everything that we can set up a winning system for people. And yeah, okay, that sounds great. Let's do it. And I'm like, all right, well, we'll do it. Let's try. And
man, I'm breaking up some dirt, digging up some bones here, aren't I?
So out of the gate, me and Bill worked hard to like get the system. So, my dad's whole thing was like, oh, we got to get the inventory straight now. I was like, okay, well, first off, let's get you off the system from 1982. Like, I love ICAS, I love you, but we were still waiting for that new system from literally like 15 years ago that I would go up to North Jersey to like for the annual conferences and stuff. And like, where's the new system? Like, where's that? Right? Where's the one that's integrated where I don't need a
slide rule and yeah.
Yeah, well, text terminal, like all this stuff to all that. So like, where's that, right? Where's the thing that's integrated with my phone? Where's where's that system? So it's like, let's find the right system. So I spent like a week and a half, 2 weeks, digging out the new system, finding a new system, implementing a new, starting to implement a new system, see what it would look like. And then we did a testing phase, which was way longer than I felt like it really needed to be. We deployed tablets to all the guys in the shop. Like, we got all this set up. Eventually got new phone systems, so everything was, voice over IP and able to be like, oh, my phone, my cell phone's ringing as well as my desk phone, which is great because we're not always at our desk because we're a shop. Like, you're supposed to be, you're out on this floor. So things like that. So we did all these things, got it all pretty much set up. But, along the way, there was a lot of arguments and fights and things of that nature. And so it wasn't a great experience. It wasn't a bad experience, but it wasn't a great experience. I wasn't overly happy. I mean, I was still working. Here's the thing. I was still operating my business as well, right, Brandon? So like in the morning on the way in, I'm on the phone. As soon as 5 o'clock hits, like, all right, I'm out of here. And the phone goes up and I'm on the phone until I get home. Right. So and then when I get home, I'm with the kids for a little bit. And then by 8 o'clock rolls around, I'm back doing video chats and things like that, working with the clients that I have, continuing to work on the Indie Pod, or it was called Mid-Atlantic Podcast Conference at the time. But Indie Pod and building that up, right? Because we had the conference coming up in Atlantic City. Or actually in 2018, we had it here. We still had it here in South, like just outside of Philadelphia. But in 2019, we had it in Atlantic City. And so it's like all that. And then in 2019, I started to film the pilot for my TV show called The Top of Super Joe Pardo. And like, it's like all these things were like kind of, it was a lot. Like it was a lot. There was a lot of pressure on me to like get these things together and like work on that. And then meanwhile, it just seemed like we were getting further and further away from the idea of building a franchise model. And it's just like, oh, well, that's really disappointing because like I'm not going. I already lived it. Like we had 10 locations. I'm not driving all over creation to make this work. Like it's
just an old model. You didn't want to go there.
Yeah, no, and to mention it, like there was already at least one company that had built. In fact, I think they're out of your area, like in the North Carolina area, that has a franchisable heavy duty truck repair company with like 10 locations. So I'm like, this already exists. Like we're not the pioneers of the first ones ever doing this thing. Like we could totally do this and collect some checks and and not have to chase people all over creation to make it happen. Around the clock kind of thing. Cause like truck repairs are around the clock thing. It's a real thing. It's one of the reasons why when we went to do tablets for the road guys, I was like, no, we're getting iPads. I was like, I'm not dealing with like hotspots and they're like calling me at 2 a.m. because it won't connect. Like, I don't want to hear anything about that. Just use the iPad. The iPad's more expensive, but use the iPad because the iPad will just work. And if it doesn't, reboot it and it'll probably work.
All right.
So, things like they're sitting on the side of the highway at the middle of the night. They don't need to be calling me. Like it's all good. So it's like things like that. Like we started to get further away, and then COVID hit, right? And then I ended up staying home, and because our son has a reactive airway disease, which we found out about last November when I'm still paying the bill for that, and then went to the hospital twice, stayed overnight once. So it's like, okay, we're just gonna keep away from people as much as we can, and as so like I've been involved there a little bit, but for the most part, it's been like all Indie Pod and trying to work back towards getting more of my clients, back to me.
Got it.
Yeah. So that pretty much sums that up.
Man, you definitely have bitten off a lot, Super Joe. It sounds
Too
like,
much.
Right. And that's another trait of an entrepreneur, is to think you can do it all. Like, Super Joe, hey, start a podcast, conference. Speaking of, let's talk about that. You and I are both geeks about podcasts. When did you get into podcasting? And then what made you think, oh, I have the audacity, I'll just start a podcast conference called Independence Podcast Conference. How'd that all come about?
Well, so like you can kind of see the DJ equipment behind me, the turntables behind me. I put out my first DJ album shortly before, or right around the time that I was leaving the company back in 2014. And it was my first DJ album where I mashed up Disney music with hip hop instrumentals to tell the story of Pixar's Up.
Okay, very cool. So you're a DJ as well.
Yeah,
like when do you find time to do all this? This is crazy.
Well, so the DJing thing it's taken a bit of a backseat. Though my daughter has fallen in love with it and keeps asking, so we're trying to make time to do that as well.
Nice.
Probably this winter, as it gets colder outside and we have more of an excuse to stay inside, we will find more ways to do that and integrate that. But so the album had come out, I was doing a bunch of podcast interviews, mostly on Disney podcasts, like roundtable discussions. And so it was a month after, or it was maybe almost a month after I had left the company. I was on a flight to Disney World with a friend of mine to run a 5K race. I'm also a runner. And so I was like, hey, what other podcasts are on this list? Because I put together like 100 some podcasts and I've been reaching out to them and was getting a fair bit of response back. I was like, what shows should I, try to go on? And he's like, oh, there's this show where they just interview entrepreneurs. And I was like, oh, I never really thought about anything like that. Like, to me, it was, I'm going on these roundtable discussions to like, hey, let's have a chat about Disney World. Oh, and, by the way, I have this album, that's coming out, and we raised money for Give Kids the World too, which was great with that.
Nice.
Yeah, it was really good. A really good time. But I was like, I know a lot of people in business. Like, I could have a podcast like that. And then I was like, but I was like, I know a lot more people that live their dreams. So on the plane, I started writing down like all the names of people that I would want to have on the show. Maybe like 75% of them I actually know or have a connection to. And then I was like, you know what? We're going to call it Dreamers Podcast. And the plane landed and I registered the domain name, the Facebook page, and the Twitter handle before we got to the rental car from my phone. So 2 weeks later, I reached out to my friend Al Kessel, who is my Mr. Voice in the show, and I was like, hey, can you help me get some of these things? Like, I already knew audio editing. I knew audio recording from the DJing part. I knew tech. I knew how to do websites. Been doing websites since '96. Like, I know a lot of stuff. But like, what am I missing? So he helped me fill in the gaps. Then I was able to was it 2 weeks later? I had my first episode out in May. So like a month and a half after I left the company, I had this show called the Dreamers Podcast. We went first it was 1 day a week, then it went 3 days a week next week, and then we hit iTunes New and Noteworthy. So I was like, hey, let's go 5 days a week, because what's 2 more episodes a week? Why the heck not?
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, and then eventually I had to take that. After about 3 months of that, I took it back a little bit, because I was like, I want to be able to write the books. I want to do the speaking, coaching people. Like, I got to have a little more time and
were you produce? Yeah. I was about to say, were you producing all that yourself?
I was. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of work.
I didn't have a lot of money at the time.
And people don't realize.
Like the trip to Disney was already planned. Like, that was already paid for. So like, I wasn't gonna not go on that. But there wasn't a whole lot of money at the time. Like, my wife was working, which was great to helped at the time. But there wasn't like a ton of money coming in. So I was like just trying to figure it out. And that's how I ended up like doing a lot of websites for like businesses and whatever I could do as I was trying to get my first clients on board. In fact, funny story, first client I had for business consulting, was paying me in laundry detergent, because that's what they made.
Nice.
Like, she was just getting started. Well, it was nice in the beginning, but then after a while, there was so much laundry detergent, we just started giving it away to like friends and family, and I'm just like,
man,
okay, I can't eat this, and I can't really sell it. Like, it's all natural, like, all that stuff. So it's homemade, all natural stuff. So it's just like, I there's only so much I can do with this. Like, I need other clients. I need to get other things.
Yeah, you got kids to feed. They don't need to.
Well, I didn't have kids at the time.
Okay, all right.
If I had kids at the time, this story would probably be much different.
Right. Because, no, I don't need that much laundry detergent.
Yeah, no. No, I would have to have a lot. Maybe if I had like Glenn Lundy's like 7 kids, I would probably,
Right.
I would need all that laundry detergent, but no, I do not.
So you started I mean, by the way, 5 day a week podcast is a massive accomplishment. I mean, my first guest on this podcast was John Lee Dumas and Kate Erickson, who have the Entrepreneurial Fire podcast. It's one of the best out there. And those
That was
guys,
the show that he mentioned on
yeah,
the plane.
and that at the time, they were running it 7 days a week, which everybody told him was insane. And he pulled it off for years. He's backed that off now to maybe 4 or 5 days a week. Still a lot, but doing that, as you know, is a prodigious undertaking. But you were able to, yeah. So, I mean, I do this once a week, and I produce it all, and that's just a lot of work as well. But people also don't realize with a podcast, it's not just the recording and the producing and sticking it out there. Then you have to promote it, and that takes just as much effort, because if people don't know it's there, it's like Field of Dreams. You don't just build it and they just show up. You've got to promote it, and people have to know, oh, there's something out there. So it takes a while. But what about tell us about the conference real quick. What's your plans? I know COVID probably threw some monkey wrenches in it, but
no, actually it's been great.
Okay.
COVID has been wonderful for that, because I've been home to work on it the most, right? And my business clients have kind of like backed off, because they're like, hey, like I might not have a business soon, so like let's back up and revisit. So So this started out as the Mid-Atlantic Podcast Conference. I was in Disney actually, and I took a day to go to a podcasting conference put on by Jared Easley and Lou Mangello.
The podcast movement?
It wasn't Podcast Movement yet.
Okay.
That was coming. They hosted this event called Podcast Florida, and so I went there, and it was like there was like 60 some people like jammed in this little room next to downtown Disney or Disney Springs as it's called now. And so it was a great day. Like so many people that I met there, like I'm still friends with to this day. Like we're all really tight. So I get home and I'm like, oh, I could do this. Like I put on raves, LAN parties. I grew up going to my family. We would do a customer appreciation night every year, like the week after Valentine's Day, and we would have like 1,000 people come through, like a bunch of vendor booths, and go to like an open buffet, an open bar, and so it was like I grew up around that stuff, doing that, and all, these other conventions that I helped work and volunteered at over the years. So it was like, I could totally do this. Like this would be nothing, this wouldn't be a big deal at all. So I put together a Facebook group that night when I got back. I'm sitting there watching like Peyton Manning. He was playing, football still I think it was Sunday Night Football. And I was like, oh, let me put the group together. I was going to do just Philly, but then I saw there was a Philly group. So I was like, let me go a little bit bigger. We'll just go Mid-Atlantic. But even out of the gate, we were inviting, like, I just bringing all my podcast friends, right? So like most of them didn't live in the Mid-Atlantic. So it only made sense in the sense that like where we were going to host the first event almost a year later in September, was in the Mid-Atlantic. So we did that. We held it in a school gymnasium, and it was awesome. We had people come back to our house afterwards, and we watched the Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather fight. I think it was the first fight that night. So we watched that, and we had like 10 people staying at our house, like all over the place. It was incredible. We had people from like Georgia. We had people from Georgia, people from Florida, people from Ohio that drove like 8 hours to be there. People that drove from Georgia I don't know how many hours it takes to get here from there, like 10 hours, 15 hours. So it's like it was so awesome. So it grew and grew, and over the years it was like, well, people, every year I get the email ask of like, is this for me? Can I come to this? Like, I don't live in the Mid-Atlantic, but we already had people, like in the second year we had Mark Gasquith come, right, from the UK. So it was like we had people from the West Coast. Rob Greenlee came from the West Coast. So, and we had people from Texas and South Dakota and California, and so we had all these people coming from all over the place. Like it wasn't just the Mid-Atlantic. So it would be another, 3 years. It was 2019. I was talking with my good friend Eric Hunley, and he's like, hey, you should really hammer this whole independent thing, independent. And like a couple weeks before the event, I was like, you know what if we change the name of the conference? Like people love MapCon. Like they're really in love with the name and the people and everything. I was like, but what if we just change the name to like International Podcast Conference, or, and he's like, Independent Podcast Conference. I was like, yes, let's do it. So like 3 weeks out from the event, I registered domain names, got everything ready, and then made the announcement that night. I had never even spoken at my own event other than hosting it. Like I would get up, I introduce each person, and when I'm there, I'm like, I'm vlogging it, I'm running the tech, I'm running the audio, I'm throwing out a like a cotton disc. It's like a frisbee, but it's made of cotton, so like people can introduce themselves when they catch it. I'm doing all these things, and we're just always having this great time. Room's growing year over year after year. But once we changed the name to Independent Podcast Conference, or ICON for short, all of a sudden, like the Facebook group grew. Like it just started growing, like 10, 15 people a day, just people finding it and saying, this is for me. Right. And then we had COVID hit. Right. So I was like, well, after we got back, we were in Disney World with the kids, get back from there. And we went to Podfest too. Or I went to Podfest and then met them up in Disney, but so we get back, we get the food and everything situated because nobody had been home in like 2 weeks. And then I was like, well, what do I do? Like, how do I show up for the community? Well, we're going to host a virtual podcast conference in 10 days. So I put the call out. We got like 60 speakers that applied. We ended up taking 40 of them, ended up making it a 2-day event just 10 days after I put out the call for speakers. And it was a huge success. So 2 weeks later, what do? We do it again. And then 2 weeks later, we do it again. And 2 weeks later, we do it again and again and again. And I kept doing different topics, like different themes for each of those events. So, people kept applying to speak and honing their speaking skills, getting their platform, and the views kept going up and up. The only thing you had to do to watch them was join the Facebook group. So join the Facebook community, get access to the free conference. And I would host them for 8 hours each. Because that's how long Facebook Live will let you go, is 8 hours.
So you were doing all this on Facebook Live?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you weren't using a platform like Hey Summit or anything like that?
Nah.
Okay.
I'm not paying for any of that. So I did pay for Zoom for our annual event, in-person event. We did it in person through Zoom, right? So everybody had their cameras on. The reason is because it was 80s themed. So I wanted everybody to be able to see each other. And get dressed up in their 80s garb.
So if you're listening, you're not seeing Super Joe stick on these very multicolored glasses that looks like something out of a B-52's video from 1983 or whatever.
Yeah. So like that's what we did that, and it was great. But no, all of the stuff was hosted through StreamYard. So we hosted, other than the Zoom one for our annual event, all the other ones are hosted through StreamYard into the Facebook group. And, it works. It costs virtually next to nothing compared to, those other services.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's a great tip. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, man, this has been awesome. This is going to be a longer show than normal for me because this is just fascinating talking to you, Joe.
It's your show. You own it.
Man, exactly. I gotta have you back on because there's just too much to talk about. Obviously, we're both geeks for podcasts, among other things. But real quick, I wanted to ask you, how did that speech that you did to the United Nations, how did that come about? Did you just knock on the door and go, I want to speak here? Or how do you get to speak at the United Nations?
So for those in the know, it was part of WordCamp, New York. So it wasn't specific. It was held at the United Nations,
okay.
But it wasn't.
All right. So it wasn't like
they were on recess.
All right. So you weren't like shilling for a country or whatever.
For full disclosure, yes.
Yeah.
No. But there was people from the United Nations there. So like some of the tech people were there at the room because they were interested in learning more about podcasting. So that's what I spoke about. There was the power of podcasting.
Okay. WordCamp, another Geek Fest, which is about people that are into WordPress, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Man. Dude, you're talking algorithms, podcasting, we're kindred spirits here. I'm going to give you the nerd title, which you probably own with pride, right?
I do. I do.
Hey, because that's what we live in, the nerd's world. And if you don't know how to work this stuff, then you're missing out, right?
Absolutely. Well, my first book I wrote about how things go from being nerd to geek to pop culture, and the nerds are just way ahead of the curve. That's all.
That's right. That's right. Well, listen, I'm going to wrap it up so people can, look forward to more when I get you back on the podcast in the future.
Love to.
Man, thank you so much. Where can people learn more about you, your business, the podcast conference?
Yeah. So if you go to joepardo.com, PARDO.com, you can learn more about me and the services I have, my podcasts that I run, which is 3 of them: the Business Geeks podcast, the Joe Pardo Show, and the Indie Pod Daily Show. And then if you want to learn more about the Indie Pod con and the community, go to indiepodcasters.com, INDIE podcasters.com.
Love it. I'll be going there too, because I want to join that community, and maybe I'll speak. And especially once COVID's lifted one of these days, magically we'll be back out in public and going to podcast conferences and stuff like that again in person, which is the best way to do it, obviously.
I think. Yeah, no, it is. Our next virtual conference should be October 24th. That's what we haven't put out a call for speakers or anything, but we won't be doing 2 days, one every 2 weeks. We're probably going to go to a once a month kind of format for these things. But just because I can't eat up every Saturday. Every other Saturday.
That's right. Your wife's like, "What are you doing, Joe? We got kids. We
didn't have soccer games or anything like that, but True. So at the time it made sense because we weren't doing anything else anyway. We weren't going anywhere, so it made sense to hey, what are we doing in 2 weeks? Nothing. Okay, great. That's when the next conference is going to be. So now, every fourth Saturday or so, or every 4 Saturdays, we'll probably we'll be doing that. But October 24th is our next one.
Love it. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'll try to jump on that. Thanks so much,
awesome.
Joe. Appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you for having me.